Killer. This is my podcast where I talk about stuff and things, cute, chaotic, and critical thinking. I'm a creative consultant and a DJ. You can follow me on Instagram at Amber a Killer, on SoundCloud, Spotify for music and mixes at Amber a Killer. Also TikTok at Amber a Killer, and the meme page for this podcast is at friend.crush on Instagram. I love hearing feedback and thoughts from listeners and suggestions for other topics. Hearing your perspectives, your experiences warms my heart. So thank you to anyone that's reached out before, and by all means send me questions, feedback, etc. on the internet. So yeah, I hope we can build the community more this year and look forward to making more of these episodes. Today's topic is going to be casual entanglements and hookup culture. So while I was doing research for this episode, there's so much information. I mean, even just the Wikipedia page on hookup culture has so much info on it. And I want to kind of talk about my thoughts and feelings based on experiences, observations, and just like some of the research I've done. And yeah, would love for people to write in and let me know what their experience with hookup culture has been. I think that how I would distinguish or define hookup culture from like traditional dating is that it's definitely more focused on sex and like physical intimacy with the absence of courtship and dating. And I don't think that it always necessarily exists completely separately from like quote unquote traditional dating culture, and there is some overlap. Obviously, like you might start hooking up with someone casually and then it becomes something serious, or maybe someone that you dated seriously becomes a casual hookup. And I personally define hookup as involving sex. I don't define hookup as in like, oh, they hooked up as in they met up, or they hooked up as in they made out. I mean, like you hooked up as in you had sex. So I just want to clarify that, and I will try to use the right language to distinguish between making out and like hooking up, right? But I think it's interesting how like other people will define hookup as, oh, they just made out, or like hookup as in, oh, they linked up. So let me know if you define things differently, but just for the purposes of this episode, that's the approach that I'm going to take. And hookup culture has been around like for a really long time. I think it's easy to assume, especially when you're like living life, that, oh, this is a modern phenomenon. It's something that's, you know, a culture that has started maybe in the last few decades as a result of things like dating apps, as a result of things like women's liberation and feminism. But when I looked on the Wikipedia page, it says that since the 1920s, there has been a transition from an age of courtship to an era of hookup culture. And I think that obviously people are sluts. That's not necessarily era specific. I think even in the age of courtship, where it was expected that men and women date to marry, I'm sure there were people still fucking around on the side trying to have their cake and eat it too. So, but I guess when we talk about hookup culture, we mean like a set of ideas and values and behaviors that define, you know, how people are connecting with each other and what sorts of like patterns and behaviors are normalized in society. So yeah, apparently since the 1920s, there's been this transition from the age of courtship to an era of hookup culture. And it even says that, you know, in the 1800s, there was a phenomenon shaped by historical and cultural forces, where there was like casual hookups in college campuses. And this is probably American focused, but obviously I'm Australian and I didn't grow up in the US, but we're heavily influenced by American culture as well. And I wouldn't say that American and Australian culture are the same, but there's definitely overlap there. So this is probably going to be a more like Western-centric view of hookup culture, specifically American, obviously. But yeah, and then it also says that feminism grew substantially in the in the 1960s, and then supporters argue that a woman should have complete control over her own body. Supporters of the feminist movement also argued that women should be able to, quote unquote, pursue men in the same way men traditionally approach women, and they made an effort to change the negative attitudes usually associated with women that decided to have sex before marriage. And then the growing acceptance of casual sex in the 1960s can also be attributed to a sharp rise in female student enrollment at college and universities. In the US, the number of women attending college in 1972 was 3 times larger than the number in 1960. So with a greater number of females on campuses compared to males, women had to adjust to the new sexual scripts outlined by men, which are based more on engaging in uncommitted sex rather than on developing relationships. And yeah, a lot of the time people talk about hookup culture around like the college experience and in a college context, but obviously it can definitely extend way beyond college. But I think, that's kind of where a lot of the research is focused. And it says that, even though dating hasn't completely disappeared on college campuses, by the mid-1990s, it was found that hookups are an accepted form of interaction among sexually active adults, especially those located on college campuses. And hookups obviously increased while dating kind of decreased. So according to one of the reviews, it's an unprecedented time in the history of human sexuality. People are marrying and beginning families at later ages than previous generations, and they're becoming sexually mature at an earlier age. So as a result, young adults are able to reproduce physiologically, but are not psychologically or socially ready to settle down and begin a family. So that's kind of interesting. So according to a review, these sorts of shifts indicate a pop culture change that has infiltrated the lives of emerging adults throughout the Western world. And it shows that hookups are becoming increasingly normative among young adults and adolescents in North America and have taken root throughout the Western world, and it represents a noticeable shift in how casual sex is perceived and accepted. Yeah, I feel like even for me, when I was growing up as a young millennial, the concept of casual sex was still pretty stigmatized when I was young, before I was like sexually active. And by the time I got to university, casual sex was just considered normal. So I think there was I don't know if that was a shift in just like that came with age. And when you're younger, maybe you assume that you are going to just get married and have babies like your friend's parents or your parents. And then when you get older, the attitudes around sex become more open, or if like it was a genuine shift in wider cultural attitudes towards casual sex, that meant that by the time I was like in my early 20s, casual sex was considered acceptable. But at the same time, like there's still a lot of stigma and misogyny around casual sex for women. I think it's just more covert. And because women continue to be sexualized and objectified to an even greater extent than they were when I was younger, I feel like we are being sexualized all the time anyway. So people can just kind of passively enjoy the objectification of women on a large scale without having to necessarily share their opinions about it if they don't feel the need to. And then the people that do feel negatively about it will potentially go out of their way to tell you exactly what they think about your role in society as a woman and what your sexual availability and your desirability says about your self-worth, whether that's overt or covert. Because when I was younger, like the internet wasn't what the internet is now. Social media is not what social media is now. You could have a break from seeing girls with their tits out or self-objectifying. You were looking at a magazine, you were maybe like on a blog or something, and I was looking at like fashion blogs. But now on Instagram, you're constantly at risk of exposure to hypersexualization, hyper-objectification of women. And I'm not making a value judgment on that in saying like, oh, because you participate in this or not, you're a good or a bad person. Definitely not what I'm trying to say, because I do think people are free to do whatever they want. But I do think at the same time, like, we are being encouraged to self-objectify for the internet, for clicks and likes, whether we want to consciously admit it or not. Like for me personally, and I speak for myself only, I don't expect everybody to have the same view as me, but I feel like To some degree, you know exactly what types of images you can post to get attention online. And whether or not it's positive or negative attention, it doesn't always matter. But I think there is a lot of cognitive dissonance between what people say they want to see and what they will viscerally react to online. Because I can think that something's really cool and artistic and obscure and abstract, and it's an objectively cool image, but it maybe doesn't have a person in it. I know that if I post it, I'm not going to get the type of engagement I would get if I posted a selfie. So that's just something that I think we're all, I don't know, subconsciously, consciously adapting to, especially now that so much of our world is online. And I think that you do have to make choices in terms of how you present yourself, what you choose to present, how you choose to present it. And we're aware of like what the algorithm wants. You know, everybody's like basically talking to or aware of the algorithm, saying, oh, you know, posting this for the algorithm, or oh, the algorithm hates me. So yeah, I just think it's interesting how we let this code basically dictate our lives, dictate the way we present ourselves online. And you can be aware of it and not play into it. But the fact that we are even aware of it and make decisions based on that, I think is really interesting. So there's definitely an influence that social media has had, I think, on our relationships to sexuality, our relationships to ourselves. There's obviously been positive things as well, because you can increase your confidence, you can experiment with your own extroversion, your self-presentation online. I definitely have experienced benefits in terms of learning how to express myself in different ways because of the internet, because of access to the internet, and, you know, the connections and opportunities that it has facilitated for me. But I do think that, I don't know, sometimes we get too caught up in just thinking about the positives. Obviously, also like the way that women and people in marginalized communities, people that aren't just cis heterosexual, being able to connect with each other, create community online, especially for anybody that grew up in really isolated places or is in an isolated place. I think that's a beautiful thing too. But yeah, it's kind of interesting the way that we commodify ourselves online and how that can also affect the way we commodify ourselves in our relationships, and especially in sexual relationships and sexual intimacy as well. I was thinking about the impacts of movies like Friends with Benefits and No Strings Attached. Both of those movies came out in 2011, just after I graduated high school. Both of those movies came out the same year, and I think that definitely romanticized this idea of casual friends with benefits, no strings attached relationships. And both of those films, I'm pretty sure, ended with the casual relationship turning into a relationship. There was always this idea when I was talking about casual relationships growing up that's like, oh, women just say they want something casual, but they actually want something serious. And I think that definitely can be the case sometimes. But for me, when I was like doing the hookup culture thing or getting involved in casual entanglements, I was very clear that I didn't want a relationship. And I was very aware of the difference between wanting someone to want me to be their girlfriend and like actually wanting to be someone's girlfriend, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of the times it's hard for us to admit that regardless of your gender, like you just want someone to want you so that you can reject them. It's an ego thing, and it's got nothing to do with whether you're actually ready for a relationship or whether you actually want a relationship. I was pretty aware of that from the beginning. I'm definitely not someone that just jumps at any opportunity to sleep with someone for the sake of doing it. Like I do prefer to at least have some kind of rapport with this person, even if it is just like a very superficial ability for us to banter. I think banter is really important when it comes to any type of relationship. You want to be able to like make jokes and have a similar sense of humor, or appreciate each other's sense of humor, appreciate the perspective that each person has, so that it's not just complete mutual objectification. I do think that having that like kind of spark or connection that exists, even if it just translates into a physical relationship, is important for me personally. And I think some people it's not as important, which I totally respect. To me, I was able to distinguish between people that I was happy to just have something fun and casual with and people that I might actually want to date. But at the same time, like, I'm not someone that really prioritizes the pursuit of romantic relationships just like as a priority for me personally. It's just not something that I grew up caring about that much. Something that I still don't really care about that much. Not that I don't want to be in a relationship or that I fear being in a relationship. I think it's just not a priority for me. Like, if I met someone that I liked, I would see where it goes. But I'm not like, oh, I need to be getting married at this stage, at this age. I need to be having babies at this age. You know, I have an idea of when I would like to have children by if I was to have them, but I'm not like determined or single-minded in the pursuit of a relationship. And I have, again, no judgment for anybody that does feel that way, but just for me personally, it's not been a priority of mine. If I'm in a relationship or a situation where I'm not happy, then I would rather exit and be happy single. And I'm going to do an episode on, you know, celebrating being single or trying to deal with stigma around being single, especially as a woman, because I think even when you feel like happy and at peace with yourself and your life and not in a rush for a relationship, it's like everyone around you is going to question that decision and they're going to make you seem like a crazy spinster. But more and more, I think it's getting easier to be able to just embrace being single as a woman and not feel like your self-worth is determined by your ability to be in a relationship or to attract a partner. The issue is not my ability to attract a partner. It's whether I even want a partner to begin with, in my opinion. But we'll leave that for that episode. But yeah, it's always framed as if women think they can turn a casual relationship into a serious relationship. And some of the research does suggest that women do think that. And they agree to the casual thing because they feel like it's the only way to get a man's attention. And this kind of goes back to the boundaries and having standards thing, where it's like, if you don't change your behavior and what you allow, then nothing actually changes. And I think it's important for women that do want a relationship to not settle for a guy that's only going to offer you something casual and think that you can change his mind or manipulate him into being in something serious. Like, if I wanted a relationship, I would want a guy to be clear and upfront about wanting that as well. And if the guy that I thought I wanted that with didn't want to be in something serious, then I would walk away from it, because what is the point? Like, you're obviously not as compatible as you think you are if the fundamental idea and foundation of what your relationship is going to be like is not compatible. You know what I mean? Like, that is a fundamental flaw, a fatal flaw in your compatibility if you don't agree on what kind of relationship you want. And I think that's hard when, you know, you do actually like the person, you get along, but you don't agree on that, what might seem like a minor detail, but is actually like a structural issue. So yeah, I think the idea that women should settle for something casual with someone that they would hope to get into something serious with is an idea that needs to be killed. It's, we need to completely discard of that, because it allows men to have access to you and for women to usually unknowingly provide a girlfriend experience to a guy who is not their boyfriend. And I think that a lot of people do actually want to be in serious relationships. A lot of guys would be happy with a girlfriend, but it's the guys that know how to present themselves as boyfriends but then offer bare minimum scraps of nothing that usually have the most success in the dating pool, it seems. So that's something to be aware of, because there's no shame in wanting a serious relationship or a casual relationship. I think it's also different when you start seeing someone casually and then it becomes serious. Like, it naturally progresses into something serious because both people are on the same page and they want it to be serious now. That is different to one person only wanting something casual, the other person saying they want something casual, but then trying to turn it into a relationship and getting frustrated because they fail. That's two separate situations, and I wouldn't look at something that started off as casual and turned into a relationship as like evidence of casual things always turning into relationships. if that makes sense. Like, it's normal for what people want to change, but if you're going into something with completely different expectations, you're going to be acting on like different values and different ideas of what's possible. I just feel like it's going to be much harder to reach common ground, because you can manipulate someone into a relationship, sure, but do you want to? At the end of the day, if someone is just agreeing with you for the sake of agreeing with you to make things easier for themselves short term, it doesn't mean that they're not one day going to wake up and be like, oh, this is not what I wanted at all and I'm going to leave. And then you feel like you've been duped. So just something to keep in mind for anybody that's like thinking about wanting to do a casual thing and agreeing to a casual thing with someone who's breadcrumbing them and thinking that, oh, maybe it'll turn into something serious. Just save yourself the time and energy and wait until you meet someone that actually is serious about you from the get-go. Because for me, I don't feel like I had an issue in terms of this is casual, but I want it to be serious. It was never really that. I had an issue when it was casual and didn't feel casual anymore or didn't feel respectful. So I think the next thing is like, mutual respect is so important in any kind of relationship. And I find it extremely disturbing how normalized it is for people to just say like, oh, well, it was casual, so you can expect them to ghost you. Oh, it was casual, so like, how can you want them to be communicating with you? Clearly, like, that's part of being casual. And it's like, I don't think that seeing someone naked on a regular basis and exchanging bodily fluids means that they can treat you with less respect than a stranger. And I think a lot of the times it's very common for women to observe this in their casual relationships with guys, where it's like everything starts off great, you get along really well, you have fun, and then they kind of decide that maybe they don't want to do it anymore or whatever. Like, I actually don't care if it's because they met somebody else or if they caught feelings and they don't know how to express it. But instead of communicating that, oh, let's just like let's press pause on this, they think that it's acceptable to ghost or be evasive and miscommunicate or disrespect you. Because I've had guys try to neg me in an attempt to, I don't know, humble me or get me in a position where I'm starting to beg for their approval, which is just not something that I'm going to do. And anytime I have done that, I've resented not only myself but them, and there's absolutely no coming back from that. I can forgive my former self, but I will never forget the dumb shit that comes out of people's mouths when they're desperate for your attention. They're desperate for you to cling on to them. And I understand why they might do that, where that might come from. But everybody has the urge to say fucked up shit or has fucked up thoughts about people. They think really mean things. And the difference is whether or not you actually say them out loud. And when someone goes there, I'm like, you can't put that shit back in Pandora's box, in my opinion. Especially if you don't take responsibility for it, which they rarely do. Yet they continue to want access from you. Anyway, but yeah, mutual respect is so important. And if at any point you feel like you're being disrespected in even a casual relationship, you are free to leave. And I think that's the kind of thing that people are trying to do. Like, often people try to create a hostile environment so that they don't have to be the bad guy and the other person can end it for them. Because in their mind, it's worse to be the person that ends it than to actually take responsibility for how they're feeling. So, and to put the other person in a position where they have to feel so disrespected that they need to end it for you. And I think that's really fucked up, and I would not wish that upon anybody, but I think it's actually very common in all kinds of relationships. And it's tough because I've definitely been the person in a friendship who's just kind of slowly distanced myself. But I don't know, I feel like when you're literally having sex with somebody or in each other's beds, there is, it's not unreasonable to expect just base levels of communication. So yeah, something to keep in mind. If you do feel like you're being disrespected, then GTFO, honey, you don't need to stick around for someone that's going to do that to you. You know, I've never felt like just because somebody is comfortable with being disrespectful means that you need to either stoop to their level or beg them for their respect. That's a sure sign of who they are. And maybe they're not like that with everybody, but the fact that they're like that with you is all that really matters when you feel like unsafe or disrespected. So I also made this TikTok like a I don't know, probably like a month or so ago by the time this episode comes out. And it was talking about this video that I saw on YouTube by one of my favorite YouTubers at the moment, Anna Psychology. I'll link it in the description. She talked about how on college campuses and her research as a PhD candidate, because I think her research is based on hookup culture on the US college campuses. She talks about how men traditionally gatekeep relationships and women traditionally gatekeep access to sex. And this is not necessarily how it should be, but it is just how it can be. And, you know, how people are sort of like subconsciously viewing or behaving in these contexts, because women are seen as objects to be objectified by men most of the time. And obviously I'm speaking in like a cis hetero context. And I think a lot of the times we're conditioned to think that men are the prize and to be in a relationship is the end goal. I personally disagree with this view, but I think it is something that drives a lot of behavior in dating and in casual entanglements. So I thought that was really interesting, and the response that I got was interesting too, because a lot of people saying that they related to the video, a lot of men getting very defensive in the comments. But yeah, so basically if men gatekeep relationships and women gatekeep sex, when you're in a situation where as a woman you just want something casual and you're upfront about it, instead of saying that you're okay with something casual but actually wanting a relationship, men who haven't really considered that women might be different and not every woman wants a relationship and maybe women are okay just doing something casual, they cannot compute this and then kind of act out because they're not able to have access to this like ego stroke that they would otherwise get with quote unquote other girls. Not saying that it's like a not like other girls thing, but I think that a lot of men just kind of see women as like this analogous blob. They don't really consider the individual humanity and autonomy and multidimensionality of women. And I think women also are at risk of doing the same thing towards men just because we're socialized so differently. And even though we're all in the same room, we don't realize that we might all be thinking completely different things. We might be acting from completely different sets of values. So yeah, I think I basically said that when you are upfront about things like that with certain men, they get confused, and instead of communicating how they might actually feel about it, they just kind of act out in bizarre ways that, you know, men kind of tend to do sometimes. Little boys tend to do sometimes. And I think if you do encounter that, then it just is what it is, you know. I think it's easy to get caught up in asking why. Oh, why is he being evasive? Why? There are many reasons why they might be. Potential reasons are they are still just exploring their options and it's not that deep, the same way that you can be exploring your options. But it's always the case where it's like the woman is only allowed to have one option. This guy, he can have as many options as he likes. As soon as he realizes that she's fucking other dudes, he's suddenly uncomfortable with that. But he's not uncomfortable with the fact that he can sleep with as many women as he likes. Double standard, and I won't have that, which is why I think, you know, sometimes it is easier just to be monogamous. Maybe they quote unquote caught feelings and they don't know how to deal with it. And I think that if you suspect this of someone that you're in a casual thing with and they can't communicate it to you, then it's probably not worth trying to pursue an actual relationship with them. It's not a valid judgment on them. I'm not saying that they're a bad person because they can't communicate their feelings, but it's like they're just not emotionally mature enough to be in a relationship if they can't communicate their feelings. You know what I mean? At least for me, it's really important to feel emotionally safe and supported in any type of relationship, friendship or romantic. And I don't want to be with someone that I have to play guessing games with. It's fine if it's just casual and you don't need to get in too deep, but I think, I don't know, it's like keep just doing casual things then if you're not ready for a serious relationship, and don't make it someone else's responsibility to communicate your own feelings, regardless of your gender, basically. Because I think even for me, when I was participating in casual entanglements and hookup culture, I wasn't ready for a relationship. And I was very clear that I wasn't ready with myself, with anybody that I was involved with, not necessarily in a way that was like harsh and rude, but I was not trying to get them to take me out to dinner. I was not hoping that they would ask me out seriously, because I didn't want to be in a serious relationship. And I think when I had encounters with people who were okay with things being casual at first and then kind of didn't want it to be casual anymore, but didn't really know how to communicate it, at a certain point you want to feel mature enough in your ability to communicate to be in a healthy relationship with someone else that can do the same thing. And I think that's probably why I've been reluctant to get into serious relationships, because I didn't feel like I had a good grip on that. And I didn't think that it would end well for me if I got into a relationship with anybody who wasn't able to at least do that for themselves, even, because then it's just like the blind leading the blind, you know. I think a lot of people are just in relationship. That doesn't mean you're in a healthy relationship, and I don't want to just be in a relationship. I want to be in a healthy one. Little tangent. So yeah, another reason might be they have caught feelings and they don't know how to communicate it. Do you want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't know how to communicate their feelings? To me, that's pretty important. And I think it's okay to just let go of somebody who's not quite there yet, even if you're not quite there yet, and to go figure that out for yourselves and come back in the future, and maybe you'll be better suited to each other. You know, life is quite long, and I think when you have faith in your ability to mature and in others to mature, then you open up the possibility of being able to meet each other again later down the line as new, better versions of your previous selves. Some people do need to be banished into your own personal hell and never able to see the light again. But other people, it's like you can just leave it and see how you go later down the line. It doesn't have to be a full-on relationship. It doesn't have to be a banishing either. It can be somewhere in between. Not all cases, but most cases I think would be like that. A lot of the research around casual relationships and like hookups as well also suggests that people who have more casual hookups tend to be doing less great mentally, more prone to anxiety, more prone to depression, and also issues with their self-esteem. And I think that everything exists on a spectrum, and you can get into like a dangerous territory when it comes to literally anything. And it's just about being able to manage your approach to something. And I don't think there's anything wrong with pursuing hookups and casual relationships. It doesn't have to be something that you do for your whole life. Everything has its season, and I think that you can have one or many seasons of just wanting something casual in your life. I think the issue usually arises when people are deriving their sense of self-worth from their ability to be desirable to others and to be sexually desirable, and when they confuse physical intimacy with emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy is so important for your general well-being, and it's just something that we aren't all taught how to have or how to develop. We don't really live in a society that teaches you how to be emotionally aware, emotionally mature. For me, it's definitely something that I've had to really work on and invest time and energy into, and money into better understanding for myself. I don't feel like anybody was able to teach me that. I think for other people it might be different. You might have been brought up by really emotionally aware parents. I am not one of those people. But yeah, so I don't blame people for not knowing better, but I think at a certain point when it's not working for you and you're of adult age, you need to start taking responsibility and reflecting on what is and isn't working, and areas that you might need to work on or become aware of, any blind spots that we missed out on. And I think that when you're young especially, and hookup culture can be like, you know, this environment that seems so normalized, seems like your only option. I think something I saw mentioned was that a lot of people assume that their peers don't want to date seriously, so that's why they end up hooking up with people casually. And it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because everybody thinks everybody doesn't want to date. So they're just casually hooking up, but they're not actually enjoying it. And then you kind of end up in this toxic environment. So I think if you are in an environment like that and you don't want to participate in hookup culture, you don't get anything out of it, don't feel bad about saying no and choosing yourself and honoring your own boundaries, because that's the only way you're actually going to get closer to finding people that are on the same page as you. You know, sometimes it only takes one person to be like, hey, this is whack, I'm not into it. And then other people will be like, oh my God, I hate it as well. You know what I mean? I don't think you're ever as alone as you think you are, because we're all living, you know, the human experience. And it's important to at least be honest with yourself. And then it's not like you have to say it out to the world, but honest to yourself, honest in the way that you behave, true to yourself. And then naturally you'll become more connected to things that are in line with that. Even when I was younger and hookup culture was happening around me a lot of, you know, like the incestuous friendship groups where everyone's hooking up with everyone, I was not so interested in participating in that. And I had other friends that were also in a similar social circle to me, and we just weren't really down with it. And I have absolutely no regrets. I think especially for me as well, just like being the only Asian girl in a sea of whiteness, it was really, who was also undergoing like intense identity existential crisis in a time that was not like particularly welcoming of diversity. It was not interesting for me to try to pursue white boys' attention who were extremely racist and rude to me. It was not like, oh, I need their approval by being considered desirable to them. I was like, I need all these people to fuck off, or I need to fuck off and never speak to them again, kind of vibe. So yeah, I think if it works for you, enjoy it. There was definitely a season in my life where I was having fun, but that season I think has come to an end for me. I just don't find it that fulfilling anymore. I no longer think that my self-worth has to be derived from my desirability. And I never felt like it was completely that either. But when I look back on my casual hookup entanglement phase, it definitely played into how I saw myself. Not in like a pathological, intense way, but it's, yeah, not something that I don't really relate to that part of me anymore. Not that I don't think it's nice to be considered desirable, but it's not something that I just need to act on for the sake of acting on. You know what I mean? Like, just because you get attention from someone doesn't mean that you have to sleep with them. And that wasn't the attitude that I necessarily took across the board, but sometimes it was like, not that you have some kind of like you have something to prove to yourself or to other people. I don't know. I had fun and I appreciate the experience for what it was. I learned a lot, but I don't need to like be back in that environment. You know, I've grown out of it. I think it's really important to remember to be safe. One thing that I do regret is being put in situations where I felt like coerced out of using protection, which now that I look back on is extremely dangerous. Now that I'm seeing a lot of people my age in their mid to late 20s with unplanned pregnancies, not something that I'm personally ready for. Now that I'm older as well, you know, people that have had experience with STIs, some that are not curable, some that are. It's just like, especially as a woman, especially in a society where a lot of people are learning to adopt woke scripts, a lot of men are learning to adopt woke scripts in order to coerce women into bed, in order to present themselves as quote unquote good men with absolutely no understanding of what that actually means. Yeah, I think about the situations I've been in where someone who I thought was a good guy, someone who presented themselves as a good guy, who talked the talk, but then would prioritize his own pleasure over my safety by insisting that we don't use protection or whatever. It actually like kind of disgusts me. What I realized was like any guy that says like, oh yeah, they just got tested, that's why it's safe. Nobody that is not able to put in the effort to use protection is going out of their way and putting in the effort to get regularly tested, in my opinion. I just don't think that's a thing, because I've been in situations with guys where we start using it and they don't want to use it, and then they go and get tested. We go and get tested to be clear and to make sure before we don't use it. But yeah, I just think I really want to emphasize that it's important for women to say no when a guy is coercing them into not using protection, if it is a hard boundary for them to be using it. And there are so many reasons why it should be, because literally you don't want to be having the rest of your life having to like change the way that you make decisions in the future based on a casual thing that you have with some guy, in my opinion. And that's happened to a lot of people, and I think it's, I don't know, maybe that's just a journey that they're supposed to be on. I don't want that for me personally, and if you don't want that for you personally, I think it's important to get to a place where desire to be desired isn't sort of so fragile that it will overwhelm all the other parts of yourself in the moment, where you will make kind of careless decisions against yourself. And I think that that's kind of where I was coming from at certain times in my life, where it's like, oh, my desire to hold on to this connection with this person, even if I just wanted it to be casual or just because I wanted that sexual intimacy because I was horny or whatever, that overcame my ability to set a hard boundary and say no. And I put myself in dangerous situations, and I'm like ashamed of it. It's like really difficult for me to talk about, but it's important, I think, for me to say to people, to warn people, to encourage people to say no, because otherwise they're just going to keep doing it. We actually are able to gatekeep sex in that way, because you can say no, and it's your right to say no, and it's your right to feel safe when you're being intimate with someone, regardless of how serious your relationship with them is. I don't think that casual hookup culture is a good or a bad thing. I think it depends on the person. It was empowering for me in some ways. At the same time, there were times where it was like sold to me as this empowering thing when it actually wasn't. I think that it's very important to make sure that your actions and your words are in congruence and your values, and same with the people that you're being intimate with, because I find it so disturbing that people can be so fucking delusional in terms of what they define and what they consider as good and bad, and then want a woman to risk her body and her health for their temporary enjoyment without even the investment and like commitment. You know what I mean? I just think that's something that's really important for people to reflect on, because it's easy in the moment to just do away with it if you haven't really thought about whether it's a hard boundary for you or not. And I encourage people to really think about it. It's uncomfortable in the moment to say no, but I can almost guarantee you'll feel better about it after. If you've had an experience where you allowed something that you look back on and you didn't want to allow, it's not a pleasant feeling. And maybe people just have to learn the hard way, but I think if you can avoid it, by all means, you're allowed to say no to a guy who would prioritize his short-term pleasure over your long-term health. Health is not something you can buy. You can buy a lot of things in a late capitalist, consumer-driven world, but you cannot buy your health back. So I really want people to think about that, please. Another thing that was mentioned is how pop culture for young people often portrays sexual promiscuity or like sexual activity, especially for teens and people in college years. And this can then encourage or normalize that kind of behavior. People that view that sort of media are more likely to participate in those sorts of behaviors. That is definitely something to consider. I think that the description of pop culture being like this quote unquote super peer for young people is really interesting, because obviously when you're younger and you're watching something on TV, it's like, oh, they're like you, but they're actually people in their 20s and 30s playing teenagers, having everything perfectly lit and scripted and edited to look a certain way. It's easy to be influenced by those sorts of ideas, and those sorts of influences might carry into your adulthood if you don't take the time to reflect and check in with yourself and see what you really want. That was interesting that there have been studies around that, because I actually find that a lot of people will deny the impact of culture and pop culture and media on their own values. The fact that people don't believe it shows how well it works in a lot of ways. And it's always the people that will deny that it has any impact and then make an assumption about how women should be or how men should be, which is an indication of how they have been programmed by the pop culture that they, or by the societal standards that they deny even exist. So yeah, the mental gymnastics is very interesting. But yeah, so that's today's episode on casual entanglements and hookup culture. Let me know if you have any thoughts. We can definitely do a follow-up. It's a very dense and complicated topic, I think. But at the end of the day, it's just important for you to know what you want. And sometimes you're going to make mistakes and it's not always going to be a pleasant journey. But whenever you feel like disconnected from yourself, disconnected from what you want, that's an indication that you need to take a step back, reconnect, reassess, and then see what you want to do next. I don't think things have to be right or wrong. It's just important to figure out what's right for you and what you can participate in, you know, a respectful and healthy way with other people. Not just what's right for you at the expense of others, which is when I think we're ego tripping. What's right for a guy is to have sex with as many women as possible, being as non-communicative and disrespectful as possible. But it's like, how does he balance his desire to have multiple partners while being respectful? Okay, that was probably what's right for him and what's right for the people that he's going to be engaging with, the same way that it is for women. How can you do what's right for you? You know, maybe pursue looking for a serious relationship, but still be able to date around and be clear with people that you want something serious. And anytime it feels as if this person is not treating you the way you need to be treated, you can walk away. That's what's right for you, and it's what's right for them, because they don't want to give you what you want either. So yeah, thanks for listening. Please write in, let me know your thoughts. If you want a follow-up episode, if you want to share your personal experience with hookup culture, how your views have changed. Yeah, I think also, just like with the panini, maybe it's been thwarted a little bit. Our plans for being able to participate in hookup culture freely are kind of, you know, experiencing more obstacles than pre-pandemic. I don't know, maybe people are still freely hooking up and just getting COVID. Not my lived experience, but yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. I like to see the way that people's attitudes change, because I think sometimes you can feel like so stuck in one way of thinking, and it can be hard to let go of that in order to move into a new like mental space, new perspective. But I want to encourage myself to do that, other people to do that. Your life is going to be different seasons, different stages, different chapters, defined by different values, I think, a lot of the time. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. And I hope you're staying hydrated. It's like 40 fucking degrees in Australia, in WA at the moment. I hope you're keeping warm if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And tell your friends and family that you love them. Go be a better person. I'll speak to you soon. Love you. Bye.